Portugal was one of the first European nations to set up colonies in Africa, holding land along the coasts in Angola and Mozambique. But by the middle of the 19th century, foreign powers began to challenge these borders. For instance, the Transvaal Republic and the British both claimed land in Delgoa Bay, but under international arbitration, Portuguese rule was upheld. On the west coast, however, they lost their claim over Lüderitz to the Germans. While in between their colonies, the land was largely unexplored, but there was some Portuguese influence in the area, through a handful of mixed-race families running plantations. They had their own slaves and soldiers known as Chicunda, and had become Africanized, with some becoming chieftains. Yet it is in the middle of the 19th century that David Livingstone explored the region and set up Anglican missions as far north as the Shire Highlands. So the Portuguese tried to bring these families under their control, but the de Cruz family in particular drove them back in 1868. Portugal then sent out a number of expeditions under Alexandre de Sherpa Pinto to lay claims to the region. But British influence began to grow as the African Lakes Company was established, and they set up a mission in Blantyre. Then in 1884 the great powers met at the Berlin Conference to discuss imperialism in Africa, and at this meeting all Portuguese claims to the region were made invalid. This is because a country needed to demonstrate effective occupation of an area and could no longer claim it based on discovery. But the Portuguese didn't give up their ambitions, and in 1885 the foreign minister, Barros Gomes, published the Pink Map and gained foreign support. They agreed to give up claims to the Casamance River in Senegal to gain support from France, and agreed on borders with the German colonies that they were neighbouring. Otherwise, the Africanized families were largely subjugated by 1884, and Sherpa Pinto was sent on further expeditions to, unsuccessfully, secure the allegiances of local chiefs. The British opened up negotiations with Portugal, agreeing to allow them to connect their colonies, but not take modern-day Zimbabwe, the far more valuable region, so this was rejected. And then in 1888 Cecil Rhodes founded the British South Africa Company, and the idea to connect Cape Town to Cairo was taken far more seriously. As such, Harry Johnson was appointed as the Consul General for Mozambique and sent to Blantyre. He arrived during the Karonga War, when the African Lakes Company and their local allies fought the Swahili and their allies over the end of slavery. One British ally in the region were the Makalolo, who came from Zambia with David Livingstone but settled in Malawi, and they, possibly persuaded by the British, attacked Sherpa Pinto on his expedition. Following this clash, Johnson, without authorisation from London, declared British protection over the Shire Highlands a month later, and then over the area west of Lake Nyasa. Meanwhile, to the south, Rhodes South Africa Company was given permission to administer territory as far north as Limpopo, and Rhodes began to send his pioneer columns into the region and would later establish Fort Salisbury. So by now the British had established themselves in the disputed areas, and Prime Minister Salisbury refused international arbitration, largely because in the past it had favoured Portugal. Instead they went straight to King Carlos I of Portugal and offered him an ultimatum in January 1890 to withdraw his claims. While in Africa, the South Africa Company began to expel Portuguese officials from Zimbabwe and even clashed with them in Manicaland. The Portuguese government refused to sign such an ultimatum, so amendments were made, giving them more land in Zambezi in exchange for Manicaland in Zimbabwe. And Carlos, who had just become king a few months earlier, soon had to deal with widespread anti-British riots across the country. Anti-British sentiment spread across the Portuguese Empire, as Antonio da Silva Porto, a famous explorer, self-immolated in protest in Africa. And in January 1891, Republicans used the discontent to launch a failed coup in Porto. So Carlos, who was already ruling over a declining nation and now facing domestic strife, finally relented and signed the treaty in June 1891, giving up their claims. Britain would, through wars like the Matabele Wars, cement their control over the region. But for Portugal, successive governments would fall, leading to further instability, and the humiliation inspired many to join the Republicans' cause. And this would ultimately lead to the assassination of King Carlos and the Revolution of 1910, which ousted the monarchy.